I'm very happy to have someone here who is basically a Highland Parker.
Yes.
And this is Maurice Allen. And good morning.
Good morning. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see you too. Now, why don't you tell everybody a little about your background? You grew up here, right?
Yes, I did. Well, actually, we've been in Highland Park for 44 years. We moved here 4th of July, 1971 from Chicago.
Wow.
Yes. So it's been, it's more, my life is more here than it was in Chicago.
Right,
Yes,
right. And
yes.
then what happened? Where'd you?
Well, actually, we came from Chicago after my parents, they had been divorced 8 years. They
Mhm.
remarried each other. My dad came from Detroit, brought my mother and my brothers and myself here to Detroit, to Highland Park, actually.
Right.
Yes.
It's such a great place. Such a great
Yes.
place. In fact, I started teaching in January of '71.
Okay, and that's
Yeah.
when I met you.
Right. A long
When I
time ago, I
started
was
this,
a
yes.
young chippy. I was a chippy. No, I'm just kidding. But then you went to Michigan.
Yes, I went to University of Michigan from 73 to 78.
Uh huh.
Yes.
And what was your major there?
I wanted to be an architect when I first got there. And when they showed me that first month, that first semester, that you're not going to make it. But I struggled and I got through it and I came on back to Detroit 5 years later.
Wow.
Yes.
Somebody said you're not going to make it?
No, I said that.
Oh, I was going to
I
say.
said that after that first semester. Well, I partied the first semester, so
Well, who
that was
doesn't?
yeah,
You know, that new being away from
Yes,
home,
yes.
a community of kids and
Yes.
stuff like that.
Yes.
And so it was architecture?
architecture. But then I came out with a psychology degree when I finally finished it up, so I
Wow.
can psychoanalyze myself.
Oh, it was that deep, huh?
It was deep.
And then what happened?
Then I left here and I spent 10 years in Houston. So I went out to Houston from 96 to 2006. I worked
You
for
look
the,
so much like your mama.
oh, and everybody says that.
Everybody,
Yeah,
I'm
everybody
sorry.
says that.
I
Yeah.
I used to work with his mom.
Yes,
So,
yes. And she came to Highland Park the year I graduated, so I missed her.
yeah.
That was good. But my brothers caught her. She called my brothers. Yes,
Yes.
both my brothers.
Steve.
Steve and Kenneth.
Yes, I was Steve's class sponsor.
Yes,
Mhm.
excellent. Yes.
So you came back from Houston.
Yes, I came back from Houston and I started working at the airport. I came back working for Continental Airlines. So when I got back, I was able to get a position at the airport, and I stayed there for 5 years. I took my retirement, and I went into the schools to do the genealogy in the schools.
Now, why? How did you get this interest in genealogy?
I went to a funeral in 1993. My mother and I took the train to her uncle's funeral, my grandmother's only brother. On the train, we met two women. They met two women. My mother and her cousin met two women in the club car. These two women were going to the same funeral because this gentleman was their cousin as well. And too small a world. So I started that at that point. Other people came from all over the United States to the funeral. And there was a cousin that was the same age as me that knew Uncle Mac, but Uncle Mac never introduced us. That's when I started,
So you started with your own family.
with my own family, yes.
And a lot of people are interested in where they came from, who their people were, but they don't know how to start.
Yes.
Would you tell us how you started?
Absolutely. Well, I started with myself. You always start with yourself. And then you go to your two parents. Everybody gets two parents. Everybody gets four grandparents. Everybody gets 8 great-grandparents, and it doubles every generation. So that's what we have consistently. So that's what you see on that board over there.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It says branching out. I don't think anybody can see. It's pretty high. Why
Yeah,
don't you
yeah.
just tell us
Yes.
what this was?
So basically what you do is you start with yourself.
Uh-huh.
And if you take a generation is usually about 25 years, let's say for average. My parents were 23 when I was born, so let's round it up to 25.
Okay.
It could be different. You know, some parents are younger, some parents are older. Let's take a generation is 25 years. So you start with that generation. You use the timeline of the census, the U.S. decennial census, taken every 10 years since 1790.
Okay.
Every 10 years since 1790, and you find out where your ancestors were on the census. And then when you go onto a site like familysearch.org, which is a free site, or ancestry.com if you want to pay for the site, you can go there and you can look at each census every 10 years.
Well, for black people, I always thought some of that was kind of difficult, especially in the South, post-slavery
Yes.
and everything. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. What ends up happening is 1870 is the census that we first showed up as people.
1870.
1870, because 1860 we were property. And I use the term enslaved as opposed to we were slaves. I'm sure nobody would go up to you and say, well, I'm slave Maurice. I wouldn't do that.
Oh, no.
But I'm enslaved. That's the condition that I lived in during that time. So 1870 is the first census we show up as people. Then 1880, that's right after Reconstruction. The 1890 census burned in a fire. So we skip over to the 1900s.
The 1890s
It
burned in the fire.
Yes.
For
Well,
the whole United States?
for the whole United States. It burned in a fire. Well, it didn't actually burn. It was just the water from putting out the fire.
Okay.
And so all of those books, books as big as this table, were destroyed because of that. So
Okay.
you have to go to other documents for the 1890 time period.
Wow.
Then you go to 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, and 1940 is the most recent census that's available for public record right now. It takes 72 years before it becomes public record. So I was born in 1956. I will be on the census of 1960, but it won't be available until 2032. So I'll be 76 years old when that comes out, and I'll be at the library finding myself on the 1960 census in Chicago.
So you're saying, wow. So you're saying it won't be available, even though you're on that.
Yes.
Why won't it be available?
Privacy. There's a
okay.
Privacy Act that's involved, and the Privacy Act came out in 1921, and they gave it 72 years before its public record.
Okay, so if you want to know, okay, so tell me what you did and what you found out.
Okay.
So
I broke the 1870 brick wall. On my dad's side, I found my great-great-great-grandfather.
Wow.
He
Where was
born
he
in-
from?
He was from Georgia. Born in Georgia. He lived in Lawrence County, Dublin, Lawrence County, Georgia. So I found him on the census. Actually, I found him on the will of the woman that owned him in 1830.
The will.
Right. So that's where you can find us by
What,
name.
she left him something?
She left him to someone.
Oh,
So he was property in 1830. So she left him, she bequeathed him to her youngest daughter. She had 5 daughters, and her youngest daughter was married. She was married to the judge in the town. Judge Jeremiah, now watch this name, Yap.
really? As
Judge
in
Jeremiah
Yap?
Yap, as in our Yap here.
Yeah.
Yap is from that same county.
Oh my
His
goodness.
family's from the same county. So my great-great-grandfather,
Oh
the
my
third great-grandfather,
goodness.
went from his slave owner, the woman that owned him.
Right.
In 1830, he was 8 years old. So he was bequeathed to the woman's daughter, who was married to Jeremiah Yap, Judge Jeremiah Yap. So he grew up on that plantation,
Jeez.
and he became an adult on that plantation. So when Jeremiah Yap died in 1853, there he shows up on the will again. He's 31 years old, and his value, he's listed on the tax inventory list, and his value is $1,200.
Oh my goodness.
He had a wife and 4 kids. His wife was $750, and the kids were $500 to $200. $543 and $200. My great-great-grandmother wasn't born yet, but I've got all of that information. I've got him on both wills, and it's just amazing.
So you went back in records.
Yes, I have to go back into the records.
Did you have to go down to Georgia, or did you?
I did initially. I went
Uh-huh.
to Georgia back in the 90s. I went to Georgia, and I went to the National Archives there. And I pulled all the McCall wills and everything. So I didn't read it for 4 months. When I finally got through reading that hieroglyphic, and I saw Hamlet on the page, I shuddered. I just shook.
I know, because I've seen some papers before. A
Yes.
friend of mine had papers of his family, and the people who were enslaved. I'll use your
Absolutely.
term. And when I just saw it, I cried.
Oh, yes.
Because the fact that people did this to people.
To other people, yes. And we weren't regarded as people. How can you be 3/5 of a person? And that was in some documents to describe who we were, or who we were said to be at that time.
So let's bring us a little more up to date.
Okay.
After that.
Yes, after that I found my great-great-great-grandfather on the 1870 census. He's 48. So I did the math in 1830. He was
He's your great
third great.
third grade.
Yeah, and
Jeez.
that's to keep the confusion of saying all the grades. Once you get past the second grade, you just say third, fourth, fifth. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
makes it
wow.
easier.
Wow. Wow. If you have any questions, give us a call.
Yeah. So
Um, so they were still down in Georgia.
they were
Everybody
still
was
in
still
Georgia.
in Georgia.
Yes, we
Because
didn't
a lot
migrate.
of families stayed in the same
They stayed.
state.
Yes, they stayed in the state, or they even stayed in the same county. We didn't have flights and train access like we do now, where we can fly somewhere else. We didn't have that then. So they stayed in the same county. He died in that county. And so did
Okay.
my great 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 grandmother, his wife.
Wow. So what year was this?
That was he died about 1890. The last record I see him on is an 1890 tax record. And he's listed on there.
So he had been a slave.
He was enslaved for all of his life until 1870, 1865, when he was about 50 something. He was in his 50s when he was released from slavery.
Wow. I just think everybody goes through their head, golly,
Yes.
about somebody in their family.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then everyone has that same. We all have a familiar and similar backgrounds.
Well, I think it wasn't a census because on my father's, they called it something else. Like, I don't know, it was his birth record, but they still called all that something else, not
Absolutely.
the census.
Yes.
Called it something else because his grandfather had been enslaved,
Yes.
and I know his name had been Ben,
Okay.
and because I have a cousin who did some of the background, she did a lot, but his name, my father's grandfather's name was Ben, and he had been enslaved, but his slave job, isn't that funny to
Yeah.
say
He didn't get
slave
paid
job?
for it.
Right. Well, they said he was a breeder,
Okay. Yes.
where they caged him
Yes.
and sent women
Sent
in.
women into him. Yes.
That is so dehumanizing.
Yes. So they would stud out the men and breed the women, and the women were chosen. Well, not necessarily chosen. The slave owners would just have their way. They would just have their way, and then these children come out and they have to get past what that shame might have been, and because they may have children by other men as well,
Yeah,
and it just had to be horrific.
it had to be. Now let's come a little closer to the 1900s.
Okay, so in 1900, by that time my great 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 grandfather was gone. He had passed, but his wife lasted till 1905. Now she was listed as $750 on a will back in 1853. In 1905, she had her own will and bequeathed her property to her children,
Wow.
and she died about 1905. She's listed in a book about the county. They have a
What
book
was her
about it.
name?
Her name was Peggy.
Peggy.
Peggy, yes, yes. So I've got great 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 grandmother Peggy, and I think her mother's name was Patsy. So all of these names I've got, and then they're written up in a book about the county from 1807 to 1941. So they have my great 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 grandmother in a book as the very prominent slavery trustworthy negress who was a midwife to all the families.
And midwife meant more than just helping someone deliver. It meant
Right.
they,
Took care.
yeah,
Absolutely. So she was a doctor.
yeah.
So any of my girl cousins who might have aspired, if they had that story that their great 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 grandmother was a midwife, they could be a doctor, they could be an obstetrician. And that's what we need to do, is get to the point where when we look back, we can find out what most of our ancestors did. And take that. Music is in my family from back to my great great grandfather on my dad's mother's side. I didn't know my grandmother could sing or play a piano. So the music that I've always had in me, and listening to you and Joe Pep Harris talk, I don't even think I was in 2015. I went all the way
know.
back to 1971.
I know, I know. That's unfortunate. I cannot help it, but you always wonder where you got the instincts and the talents you have, and a lot of times it comes from our ancestors.
It does. It really does.
It really does. And I remember I always used to like to write. I mean, write. I even get in trouble for writing notes in class. I'm just always writing. And my mother always said, your writing's going to get you in trouble. Well, years later, I found out, and I ended up writing some books and
Yes.
stuff. Years later, I find out that my father used to write her a letter every day
Awesome.
when he was
Awesome.
in every day. Because I always wondered, I said, why do I like to write so much?
Yes.
And I mean, just things, and I think it's so important for our families to talk to each other,
Yes.
to give information. So are you up to date? Are you done?
I am not done. I've just finished the manuscript on that side of the family. I've got the book out, got the book completed. It's called 100 Souls.
Wow.
That same family, where my great-grandmother, Lula McCall, married my great-grandfather, Milas Walker, in Georgia, right there in Dublin, Georgia, they got married. There have been 100 of us born since they got married in 1901.
Amazing. So did you get to find out many of the occupations and stuff?
Yes, there was a great-great-grandfather that was a harness maker. Who makes harnesses? We don't do that now.
No, of
But
course.
he worked in leather. He worked around horses. He had to be knowledgeable about that. He probably made saddles and shoed horses and all of that. So there's some hands, dexterity. He's got good use of his hands. He used his
Right,
hands
right.
to make his living.
Right.
And he had to be a prominent somebody in that county.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yes.
And so you're up to that's on your
That's on my
grandma.
dad's side.
Yes, which started with his great great great
Yes.
grandfather.
Yes.
All right. So now you have to go to Eddie Ray's side.
Yes.
Your mother.
I got back on my mother's side. I found her grandfather, Caleb Lyles, and then his father, Caleb Lyles Sr. Caleb Lyles Sr., I found him listed in the pension files, 1890 pension files. He was in the Civil War.
Wow. And that was in Georgia too?
That was in Mississippi.
Mississippi.
Now, my mother's from Mississippi. My dad's dad's people are from Georgia.
Right.
And they met in Chicago when my mother moved from Mississippi in the 40s migration, moved into my dad's neighborhood. So they've known each other since they were 9 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Just some history, yes. So when I found my great-great-grandfather, I went to D.C. and I went to look for the file. And I went to the little room. You had to give your license and everything. And they pulled a Pendaflex file out. So I figured, okay, there'd be 2 or 3 sheets in here. There were 200 pages of documents on my great-great-grandfather.
Really? Why?
Because he was in the Civil War, and they itemized every campaign that he was in from
Oh, my
1864 to
goodness.
1866.
Oh, amazing.
He told of all of his children. He gave the exact birth dates of each of his kids. And he gave the death of his wife, my great-great-grandmother, and just gave all that information. He was described as about 5 feet 8 inches. They checked his weight at any time that he had a deposition. And it was just awesome.
Wow.
I got on the plane, working at a Continental. I got on the plane, flew back from D.C., and I sat on the 3 seats. I sat right in the middle. It was an empty plane pretty much. I let all the tables down, and I pulled all these documents out. I copied all 200 pages. I read them, and I shuddered when the thought crossed my mind, I'm the first descendant of this man to see all of this information.
The first one.
And it scared me. So when the flight attendant came by, he said, "You okay, sir?" I guess water was running down my face and the whole 9 yards. And I said, "Yeah, I'm just looking at some information that I thought I would never see ever in life."
Amazing.
So Mom and Dad, they used to fuss. Well, I started on my mother's side, and then Daddy got jealous. Well, when are you going to start on our side? So I started on his side and got farther back.
Yeah.
But I was able to share with them that I had quite a bit of information.
Oh, that was just amazing.
Yes, yes.
That was just amazing. That is so. Where would people start? Where would my audience start if they're starting to look up their people?
They would start with the first 3 generations. So you start with yourself, you count that generation, your 2 parents is the next generation, and then your 4 grandparents will be the generation after that. So you start with those 3, and then take it step by step. Use the census as the timeline. And I found my parents on the 1940 census. They were 7 years old.
How did? Okay, you found them. You mean you found them down south, and that's
My mother was down south, my dad was in Chicago. So my mother was still in Cleveland, Mississippi in 1940. So I found her living in the household with her parents. So of course I know my grandfather's name, and that's how you do it, by the head of household.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay. I see. I mean, do you have a website or something that people can write you or something?
Well, my email address, you can always email me at mallenjr, MALLENJR 56 at yahoo.com. That's my email address. I'm also on Facebook under Maurice Allen Jr. And then if you wanted to go in and just do some minor research, just to wet your feet, get your toes wet on it, go into familysearch.org. Familysearch.org, all one word. And then that's the free site. And just set up an account there. It's free, use with a username and a login, password. And then once you get in, just do a search. Put any ancestor's name in there and see if you get a hit.
Well, I did find out that my father's grandfather,
Yes.
once he was released from slavery,
Yes.
he used to sit under a tree and tell stories.
Excellent.
And it was funny to find that out. I found that out in the early 80s because when I started teaching and everything, my students said, Miss Perryman, you got a story for everything. You got to say, I said, I cannot help it. Where did I find these stories? And that was something that was probably passed down because my father used to tell stories.
Yes.
People gather around him and he would tell stories.
Absolutely.
And there's so much about our families that we could take pride in too. And so that would be a great thing because I would love to do that.
When you're ready, let me know. When you are ready, let me know. What ends up happening is you'll remember those stories, and then once you get the documents to go along with it, you're halfway there. You're really halfway there.
Right. Oh gosh, I can't get enough of this. But we have to. Time is up. Time is of the essence. Maurice Allen, thank you so much for coming on and these beautiful displays. I'm sorry I couldn't get them up. But thank you so much. Remember, contact him on Facebook, Maurice Allen Jr. He can help you, at least give you some information. And we'll be back in just a few minutes with Table Talk, and we have a lot to talk about, too. And we've got a little history, too. So I'll see you in a few.